GoDaddy is our sponsor for our coverage from OpenStack in Barcelona. Our theme for the conference, diversity and inclusion in the OpenStack ecosystem. Learn more about GoDaddy's diversity efforts at godaddy.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at OpenStack Barcelona, here with Kyle McDonald. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, Alex, how are you?
Good. And Rocky Grober, how are you?
Hey there. I'm loving Barcelona.
Loving it. So, Rocky, I got to ask you, how did you get the name Rocky?
Well, the name is Rochelle. And way back in high school, I was doing theater tech for, they needed folks to do tech for a junior Miss pageant. And
oh my.
When they listed out the names of the help, they pronounced my name Raquel. And so first was Raquel for a long time, and then it just migrated to the easier Rocky.
So Rocky, tell us a bit about yourself. That was just kind of the question I had in my mind. I should probably preface this by asking, what do you do? Where do you work? What's your story?
What do I do? Anyone who's read the old Tom Hardy books, I've been told that I'm a synthesist. I consider myself a catalyst. I think out of the box. I have a quality perspective, and I just try and make everything better. I'm process-oriented and want to optimize process so you get just enough and not too much, so that everything works smoothly.
So in this new world of, that we're in, the open source world, and the Linux community in particular has a long time, been a pretty small community. Now it's starting to grow into something much bigger, right?
Right.
But we're still seeing it, grow not as diversely as a lot of people might like.
There are a number of ways that you can get the diversity in there, and part of the issue with diversity in the open source community is that it has less diverse roles than traditional corporate development and productization. And that's because generally open source delivers code, not product. An area where women tend to migrate is quality assurance and user experience. And it's a mindset thing and a few other things. Women are much more into communications, which is why the user experience is so important. And that has not, until recently, really been a focus of open source. So
the user quality experience. User
quality and just user experience. It's folks writing code for other developers. And now that the code's moving into the general populace, I think we're seeing a more diverse community, both contributing to code and contributing other important aspects of open source.
Now you go by Rocky, so is that a name that helps in a male-dominated ecosystem?
It does. I go back a long ways, and when I went to college, the ratio was 1 woman to every 7 guys on campus. And Rocky made it easier, and I continued it through my work experience because I was a double E, and people just don't expect women to be double E's, especially not back then. And it turns out that I actually avoided a lot of the hassles that have actually only started in the past decade or two because of the name. People see Rocky on IRC and they don't know who I am. They don't hear a feminine voice coming from my typing. And so I never got hassled. I never knew that women were getting hassled on IRC. So it's definitely been a positive, and in some ways it's a negative. I've managed to miss out on a lot of the bad stuff.
On the positive side, you don't get that, you don't get maybe the the harassment or whatever you might call it. But on the other side of the coin is like there's like an identity abstraction there.
Yes, there is an identity abstraction, and yet I've never really viewed myself when I'm working as any particular male, female, or whatever. I'm just an engineer.
Right.
And
exactly.
So just let's geek out.
Yeah, that's an interesting side of it. Kyle,
are you seeing more people understand that, right? I mean, is the focus on diversity almost drowning out the I'm an engineer? Is that?
Well, in some areas, yes. I've worked on both coasts, and on the East Coast, they'd gone through, the federal government had lots of projects, and anyone who contracted with them had to meet certain things, and they had quotas. But on the East Coast, way back, decades ago, they figured out that they could hire one of their quotas and still get a good engineer. And so they didn't have to just hire for the diversity, they were hiring to get good talent. And then I moved out to the West Coast, and that shift hasn't seemed to occur on the West Coast. And it's disappointing, but I feel like there hasn't really been much headway made in that over the decades I've been on the West Coast.
Do you find many women go by male names in the Linux? Is that an uncommon thing? Is it something that you see happen? I know some people keep anonymized, actually, to some extent.
Right. I think if you look at Twitter and IRC and handles and the old days when there were handles that people had, those tended to be less sexually identifiable.
Right.
They associated with hobbies or focus on technical focus or whatnot. And a lot of women who are into the technical deep do have taken on that same aspect of not focusing on sex, focusing on interests.
And when you look at some of the organizations, so you've had a chance to be in a couple of different organizations, very diverse sets of organizations. Which are the ones, what are the characteristics of the most welcoming sort of team you've been on, right? What are the things that teams do? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but, what highlights you as an engineer rather than this kind
as
of
a
what
woman
I'm looking for?
Yes, and in fact, something over the years, I've been at large companies, I've been at startups, and I actually went to a startup that looked very diverse. They had Hispanic women, they had men who were of all different ethnicities and a few different age categories. They had women, again, different stuff. But what fascinated me when it all came down to it, they looked diverse, but they all had the same mindset. And so they were less diverse than, believe it or not, Lockheed Missiles and Space, where I worked for a bit. Lockheed Missiles and Space, I had more impact on that company than I've had on many startups. And it's because, at least with most of the managers I worked with, they had a management team that would provide a safe space for all the quirky engineers to do what they enjoyed doing without being threatened with loss of job or being attacked or any of those aspects. And so they knew how to actually get the most work out of their engineers, and they tolerated the full spectrum of quirks and eccentricities.
So tell us about your engineering work that you're doing now.
That's an interesting question. I have been really focused on OpenStack and trying to find ways to improve the operator user experience, essentially
Because it's so bad?
because it takes much too much work to operate and maintain OpenStack than it should if there was a little bit more effort put into consistency of design and
User experience?
and also just taking lessons from all the folks that have been here before. IBM, DEC, they all had large systems and they had processes to make it easy to get information on when something goes wrong, where to go to look. And it's there is a bit of not invented here that's happening in this environment. But recently, I've transitioned to a new role in Huawei, and I am in a group that's horizontal across all the products and services teams. And the specific group I'm in is called Quality and Operations. And what we're trying to do, and one of the reasons they wanted me there, is Huawei's very interested in open source and really believes that they need to be there to be successful. And now they have tasked this horizontal organization with coming up with the tools and processes and training necessary to get their engineers effective in participating in open source and being able to find the right path to being successful productizing open source.
So back to kind of the original questions, how's the representation inside the organization, inside the OpenStack community itself, and how is that affecting the development, do you think?
There is a tension, and every good tech company has a good tension between marketing, sales, technology, and quality and technical support. And that tension is in OpenStack, but there still hasn't been finding that stability point where the operators requesting needs for their performance, the technical support, the quality, and whatnot, and the product managers, there's not quite that balance found yet between the technical community and the user community. And
wow.
OpenStack keeps working really hard at that, but we're still trying to find that balance. But it's getting better.
What could we do to improve that balance? Is this something we should task the sponsor? OpenStack is made up of a number of sponsor companies who participate at different levels, anywhere from platinum sponsors, the top 6, to gold sponsors, and then down the list. What could they do to better help that picture inside of the global OpenStack community?
That's a wonderful question, and I think there are a few things that could be done. OpenStack has been driven so far by very, very committed, very serious open source developers. But most of these open source developers have not worked in a corporate environment where they had to actually produce product. They're very good at producing code, but not product. There needs to be, I think there should be, within the OpenStack community, Upstream University could have training courses, not just for newbies, but for the developers in the community. The best practices for databases would go a long way to improve quality across every project. And other ways to do it is that if the sponsor companies employ a lot of folks who contribute directly, if they actually demanded that their contributors reach out more across project boundaries. The projects right now are very siloed.
Are they?
They keep trying to get cross-project, but the attempts to cross project lines is difficult because the community itself, the all hands, believe that we can't actually force anyone to do it. We have to just ask nicely. Well, maybe it's time to ask a little more forcefully.
So as a developer, if you're in one of the projects, then you're probably deep with that organization. You've made some social connections with the other developers on the project. But you're saying, and I just want to make sure I hear this correctly, is that that's very hard to go take to a new project and just move to a new project, because that's a new social group you have to sort of connect to. And so if we're not reducing the barriers for that, then that's just more challenges when you're going to...
That's definitely a large chunk of it. There are definitely the barriers socially, but there are also barriers technologically. And that is, each project has defined their own development process. There are some basic things that are the same across all of the projects, but for instance, each project has their own set of hacking rules and their own set of checks to make sure that the code is the way they want it produced. So you could be a really great code writer on, say, heat, and you go to Nova and you could get trashed because your coding style doesn't match the Nova coding style.
Right.
And that's something where really to bring this community more together and to reduce the silos, let's make some OpenStack-wide standards on certain of these aspects so that there is more capability of mobility.
Doesn't that
across.
come down to, in many ways, the hierarchies of the groups themselves and how they're represented inside those groups, and like how they and who's surfacing to the top of those groups? And that too reflects a lot on questions about actually who does get that, who actually does have the responsibilities and the decision making, to make that change, and that's a diversity issue.
That's a diversity issue, but it's also, a lot of it is that OpenStack started as 2 projects, and I don't think that they were all that friendly to each other. And so the origins made it very easy to continue on that model. But if you look at OpenStack now, it's large enough that there are horizontal projects in OpenStack, QA, Docs, Oslo, and there should be, and in some ways databases getting to that point. And that demonstrates a need to tie all these projects together. Maybe we need to give a higher level of importance to those horizontal projects. Maybe we need to sit down and say, okay, we're going to converge the software process of all these projects to an OpenStack approved process that has fewer differences across different projects.
So then perhaps user experience issues might surface due to the need to have be able for the horizontal organization basically to function properly across the different projects itself.
Yes,
right.
And everyone always says new blood sees things that you have become blind to
right.
over time. And so just cross-pollinating the projects will improve quality.
Well, Rocky, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. Really appreciate it.
Certainly.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we should have you on more often to come and chat with us.
Well, I'd love to do that. Thanks
Good.
so much for having me.
But next time, I'd like to know about missiles. after hearing that you worked at Lockheed Missiles. That just sounds fun.
In space.
And space.
I worked on Space Station.
Oh, wow.
You
That's
did?
I
cool.
worked on Space Telescope.
Did you really?
I worked in AI.
No kidding.
Yep.
Cool. That's
So from space
The
to
roots.
clouds.
That's how you make stable, debuggable systems. If it's flying in space, you can't go up there and touch it.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Rocky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
GoDaddy is our sponsor for our coverage from OpenStack in Barcelona. Our theme for the conference, diversity and inclusion in the OpenStack ecosystem. Learn more about GoDaddy's diversity efforts at godaddy.com.